bill.
House Bill 2408, relating to the application of a prevailing rate of wage to public works projects and declaring an emergency.
Question now rises upon third reading and final passage of House Bill 2408A. Representative Fahey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, House Bill 2408A comes to you from the House Committee on Business and Labor. At the start of session, the chair of that committee pulled together a stakeholder work group, which I served on, to work through a total of 7 bills dealing with the issue of prevailing wage. This bill is the one bill that emerged from that work group. The bill modifies the definition of public works for the purpose of determining which projects are subject to prevailing wage requirements. It expands the current definition to include projects located in enterprise zones where the business receives a property tax exemption and the total project cost is greater than $20 million. Colleagues, I think it's important for us to be aware of some context about prevailing wage laws as we consider this bill. First, ORS spells out the intent of our prevailing wage laws. One of the purposes is to ensure that contractors compete on the ability to perform work competently and efficiently while maintaining community-established compensation standards. And it also says to recognize that local participation in publicly financed construction and family wage income and benefits are essential to the protection of community standards. In other words, if public dollars are supporting a project, we have a responsibility to ensure that we are not undercutting the wages in a particular area. And we'd rather those public dollars be spent on contractors that are local to Oregon versus out of state. And indeed, academic research indicates that when a project pays prevailing wage, it's more likely that in-state contractors will be hired, which keeps more of the economic benefit from the project and the public funds right here at home. Another piece of background that I think is important is that the majority of peer-reviewed academic studies show that paying prevailing wage on a project does not increase the total cost of the project. 75% of peer-reviewed studies showed that while paying prevailing wage rates may increase wages, the higher wages mean that more experienced, more skilled workers are hired. This leads to fewer cost overruns and overall project savings from increased efficiency, productivity, quality, safety, and timeliness. Currently, in Oregon, if a project by a private entity uses more than $750,000 in direct allocation of public funds, that private entity must pay prevailing wage. Ultimately, this bill is based on the idea that tax abatements and incentives should be treated as public funds. It takes the position that there's little difference between an outright allocation of $750,000 and telling a private entity that they owe $750,000 less in taxes than they otherwise would have. This is not a unique or unheard of idea in other states. There are certainly examples of states that require prevailing wage in exchange for tax incentives. There are similar provisions for economic development or enterprise zone projects in Minnesota and New Jersey, who explicitly say that accepting a tax exemption or abatement comes with the requirement to pay prevailing wage. And more generally, prevailing wage requirements can be applied to private projects in 12 other states. In an ideal world, we would have set the threshold for projects that are required to pay prevailing wage at a total tax abatement greater than $750,000. But that amount is difficult to know with precision in advance. So instead, we used a project size threshold. We did review data from Business Oregon, listing out all the projects in enterprise zones, their estimated total tax abatement, the estimated size of the investment. I believe that this data shows that the projects over $20 million in size will almost always have a total tax abatement greater than $750,000. And that data from Business Oregon also showed that only 10 to 15% of projects in the state in enterprise zones are likely to qualify under this threshold. Ultimately, this bill ensures that workers on projects receiving considerable public support are paid the same wages and benefits, regardless of whether that public support is in the form of direct project funding or a tax exemption. Thank you, and I urge your support.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Smith, Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, today I rise in support of House Bill 2408, and that may come as a shock to some, but I want to give you a little bit of background about my career. As you've known, as I declare conflicts of interest, I do business and economic development. I do it both in the public sector and the private sector. And colleagues, I would ask you one question. What is the role of economic development? It's to create good family wage jobs. And who better to provide those family wage jobs than the men and women in the trades, Madam Speaker? Now, some will argue, and it's a legitimate argument, that if you require a prevailing wage, that a company may not use an enterprise zone. Maybe. That may be true. But I can share this with you. In District 57, home of the Port of Umatilla, the Port of Morrow, the Port of Arlington, Port of the Dalles, Biggs Junction, the Port of Morrow and Morrow County has the 5th highest per capita income in the state of Oregon. Check it out. Multnomah County, Washington County, you're up here, but we're chasing you, and we're going to catch you. And the reason for that is because we put men and women to work paying prevailing wage on big commercial projects. Now, I want to share one other thing. As a state representative, my job is not to manage the state of Oregon. My job is to take care of my district. Roll up my sleeves and jump in and take care of my district. And I want you to know the men and women who are involved in the trades have been there for District 57. When we had questions about a cogen facility, whether it was going to stay open or not, our tradesmen and women were there. When there was question about moving commodities on the Columbia River, our tradesmen and women were there. When there was questions about building data centers, our tradesmen and women were there. When there was questions about, are we going to build reload facilities in the state of Oregon, our tradesmen and women were there. For me, it's pretty simple. They've been there as a key partner in economic development, and I personally am of the opinion we need to be there for them. Let's make sure that we create good family wage jobs for all Oregonians, and who better than our tradesmen and women. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative Evans.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Today,
To the bill?
To the bill, yes, thank you. I want to share thoughts that I said at the time that this passed out of committee. I'm going to be a yes today. I think that the work done by Representative Fahey and the entire group of people involved is very good work. I do say, however, from the experience of being a mayor and in local government for many years, that enterprise zones, it's a special balance to get it right. Because sometimes, especially in areas that are outside the best markets for potential businesses, putting together the right deal to make it work is a little bit difficult. So I hope that as the Senate looks at this, it may look at one of two options. One, maybe perhaps raising the cap to $25 million, or perhaps tying the $20 million to our minimum wage tier system in terms of a $20 million in the frontier counties, a $25 million in Tier 2, and $30 million in the Tier 1 Portland area. I say this because I think that this particular solution will help, but I think the real problem that the bill doesn't address is the out-of-state subcontractors that are actually taking perhaps more advantage than we wish they were of some of these larger contracts. I think that there are other ways, other tools to go after that, and I look forward, hopefully, to working with folks that are interested in that in the interim. At the end of the day, I think it's very important that public dollars go toward projects that pay the right wages for working families, but I think it's equally important to make sure that those dollars go to Oregon working families as much as possible. So I urge and I vote. I applaud the work done. I hope that there's just a little more progress that can be done in the Senate and that it passes through. I urge and I vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion. Representative McEwen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Madam Speaker and colleagues, I am a firm believer in prevailing wage and apprenticeship training and all the things that come along with that. And I do greatly appreciate the comments of the good representative from the land of food and shelter. There are many of us who would love to grow up and be like them in the prosperity that they've seen around the Port of Morrow someday. It's a goal that we set. And I'm also really appreciate the comments made by the good representative from Independence, Monmouth, and Salem, because he's touched on something that I have a concern about. I represent very small communities, small port districts, and I think making sure that we get this bill absolutely right is really important, and I am concerned about the level at which the cap was set, which could potentially have a chilling effect on having an enterprise zone program available by negating the incentive. So my hope is that this goes over to the Senate and an adjustment could be made and it could come back for concurrence at some point. Because of these concerns, I will be a no on this bill today in its current form, and hopefully it comes back. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Boshart Davis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
To the bill?
To the bill. I appreciate everything that my colleagues have all said today. And again, I stand up and I talk about collaboration and consensus. One thing that we didn't do, we were part of a work group, as was said in from the carrier. And one thing we didn't come to was consensus. We understood the problem. The problem was mostly about the out-of-state workers that was talked about on the floor today, and this bill doesn't fix that. One of the statements on one of these floor letters says, invest our tax dollars hiring Oregon companies and Oregon workers. This bill doesn't do that, and I agree with everybody here that is an issue. We want our projects built in enterprise zones built by Oregon workers and Oregon companies. Of course we want that. We're Oregon grown. I'm Oregon grown. So this bill doesn't do that. It's too bad that we didn't come to consensus on a dollar amount. That is what, there was a level. I agree that it should be higher. I agree that it would be more bipartisan and more consensus if it were higher. For that, I personally will be a no vote for that specific reason. As a daughter of a truck driver and growing up in the truck shop, I completely understand family wage jobs. I completely understand that, and in no way does this impugn that idea. I want to say a few other things. One other points to this bill on this floor letter says stimulate the local economy, increase income tax revenue. That won't happen if the projects aren't built. Will the project still be built? Maybe, maybe not. We don't know that because we don't have the data to suggest that. And I'm not saying that we're missing any data. We're just saying that moving forward at that 20 million threshold, there could be projects not being built. At 30 million, there possibly could be as well. But when you raise that threshold, the possibility of that happening isn't there. I also want to clarify, I know that there is some misleading information that League of Cities was not invited to the table for discussion in this work group, and that's actually true. They weren't invited, not for any negative reason, but only because the chair asked us to keep that work group small. So I want to make sure if there's anybody thinking that that was the case, they would have shown up had they been invited to be part of this process, but it was only because it was asked to be a small group. And if you look at the floor letter that I brought forth today, it really talks about the enterprise zones. I really think that it is a bright spot in Oregon business. It's a bright spot for some of these economies across Oregon, a lot of these in rural Oregon. And requiring the payment of prevailing wage rates on private construction projects offsets the very local economic development incentives provided by tax abatements. And again, I want to say again, could it still happen? Yes, but possibly no. And any threshold that you can increase will make that possibility happen. Even at 20 million, mandating that public procurement requirements like prevailing wage on these private projects could change the economic incentive offered by a local government. And one of the other reasons given was this is not new. Other states do this. And yes, other states do this. But I also would like to point out that every state is not created equal. They're going to have different tax abatements and different taxation processes in different enterprise zones. So I don't think that you can compare apples to apples in that case. So for all of those reasons, I will be a no vote today. I urge there to be no votes out there so that we can send a message over to the Senate to say we support our trades. We also support enterprise zones, and for that reason, we need that threshold to be higher so this can be a win-win, a consensus and collaboration for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Wilde.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
This bill shows the value of doing it right the first time. Pay someone who knows what they're doing a living hourly wage, and you will save not only the hours, but you save the time and having to do it over. Paying living wages also incentivizes folks to enter the building trades. We are already critically short of workforce. As to the funding piece, from my perspective, it doesn't matter whether you pay for something out of the front door or out of the back. You should pay a living wage. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Helt.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
For a project to gain enterprise status, the jobs they create must pay 150% or more of the average wage in the region. And these are long-term jobs, so they have tremendous positive impact for long-term residents and workers in our area year after year. According to EDCO, there are 10 projects in the enterprise zones in Central Oregon that would have been negatively impacted by this requirement, representing over 187 million in investment and over 500 permanent jobs. EDCO notes that the Milken Institute ranked our overall wage growth over the past 5 years as #1 in the country, 200 plus small metros. So economic development that enterprise zones foster has the effect of raising all wages, particularly via new, well-paying permanent jobs. I believe that we need to support our trades and make sure that they have people coming into our economies to invest in jobs that are well-paying and long-term, and for those reasons, I will be a no vote today. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Hovey.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I rise in support of House Bill 2408, and I just want to offer a slightly different perspective on this bill. I quite frankly think if you have a tax credit or a tax abatement that's given to you by a public entity, they are giving you public funds. And if it is above $750,000, it should trigger prevailing wage. That would be my hope that the Senate fixes. I think the threshold's too high. Construction jobs, just a comment, construction jobs are long-term jobs as well, and they are a big part of our Oregon economy, and we need to pay living wage jobs to that industry. We have a huge shortage of construction workers, and if we continue to pay them less than 150% of the average wage, we won't replace that workforce, and our projects will get more and more expensive. And to the point that Representative Fahey made, there is absolutely little evidence, maybe some, but very little evidence that paying prevailing wage raises the cost of a construction project. That argument has not been proven. The efficiency of paying qualified, skilled people gets the job done, and when contractors don't have to pay that, they oftentimes will put that savings in their pocket, not saving the contracting agency any money at all. And so I stand with the construction workers. They need to be paid what they're worth, a living wage. I support prevailing wages, and I urge everyone to vote aye.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion, Representative Drazen.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Very quickly to the bill.
To the bill.
So I have really appreciated the range of comments and the dialogue today on this particular bill. In the Economic Development Committee, we just passed a bill that reworked some of the ways that the enterprise zones work in House Bill 2053, including some of the wage standards. And the folks who use these enterprise zones came before our committee and really spoke in glowing terms as to the positive effects of enterprise zones on their communities and wages and long-term employment, and what a real valuable tool it is to local governments for them to be able to drive economic development in parts of the state that are sort of not your usual suspects. And I want to be really, really responsive to both the fact that this bill is in fact a very substantive change to how we implement how we use prevailing wage and how it impacts enterprise zones in our state. And when the folks who use our enterprise zones tell us that their concern is that mandating public procurement requirements like prevailing wage on these private projects will eviscerate the economic incentive offered by a local government and dissuade projects from moving forward, that is my concern. And so I look forward to seeing, and I also recognize that the folks who are supportive of adopting this have legitimate concerns about people who have been bad actors in this space, and that we should be supporting Oregon workers, family wage jobs for the trades here in Oregon, not for folks outside of the state. But I don't really believe that this bill entirely gets at that issue. And they also state that the current E-zone statute contains wage standards for the permanent employees in E-zones, but not for the construction workers. But this bill doesn't actually take what we have for wage requirements in our enterprise zones and apply it for construction workers. It overlays prevailing wage into the enterprise zones. And I do think that that's an important distinction to note. And so I look forward to seeing how this bill progresses on the Senate side. And today, unfortunately, I'm going to have to be a no on this, but I am hopeful that there will be another opportunity to vote again on this measure. So thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Barker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, to the bill.
To the bill.
Colleagues, I just want to say a special thanks to Representative Fahey and Representative Bossart Davis for agreeing to be on the work committee and doing a whole lot of work trying to get people together. And I'll just mention one other thing. In the small communities where they import workers from someplace else, sometimes it's because they don't have the local talent. And part of this bill will help the unions that are doing these projects with their apprenticeship programs create skilled local workers in those communities that will be there for future jobs, and I think that will help Oregon and all of us. Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I ask for an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Representative Bossart Davis in the queue for the second time. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To the bill, I wanted to make sure as we're speaking, I forgot to clarify, as we're speaking about family wage and living wage jobs in the trades, I wanted to clarify one data point that I forgot to state. Also, private construction workers make, on average, $56,000 per year. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were all aware of that statistic in this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Further discussion? Seeing none, Representative Fahey, would you like to close?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Just for a minute. There's been a lot of conversation about enterprise zones, and I just want everyone to be aware of sort of what that is and what the requirements are right now. So there are different types of enterprise zones, but under the standard enterprise zone program, there actually aren't any wage requirements for the permanent jobs. And so there was a mention made of 150% of the median area wage. So the standard program is a 3-year tax abatement. But it can be extended to 5 years if you commit to meeting certain wage requirement and compensation requirements for the permanent employees. So the 3-year program, you don't have to meet them. If you extend to 5 years, you do. The other piece I'd like to say is just, looking at this, we're going to have a conversation in our Economic Development Committee about accountability in our economic development programs. And what does that look like? And if you don't meet the jobs or the wages criteria that you commit to, what happens then? Are there clawbacks to those tax abatements that have been offered? Because right now, just in reviewing our economic development tools, I think there's some work to be done on that factor. For example, in the Standard Enterprise Zone program that goes for 3 years, you can get a 3-year tax abatement just for creating one job. And some of the data from Business Oregon shows that there are a number of projects for which they had 3 years of many hundreds of thousands of dollars of tax abatements for creating one job. So, thank you very much. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Representative. Those of the opinion that the bill should pass will vote aye. Those opposed, no. The clerk will open the voting system. Representative Marsh, how do you vote? Marsh votes no. Representative Bynum, how do you vote? Bynum votes aye. Representative Mike McLean, how do you vote? House Bill 2408A, having received the constitutional majority, is declared passed. Clerk will read the next bill.
House Bill 2415, relating to payments on contracts.